Hello, and welcome to Lion and Mouse Commentary. We are your hosts, Holland
and Tori,
two best friends as different as a lion and a mouse. Today we are continuing our review of Avatar: The Last Airbender Season 1. We will be covering episodes 11 through 15 in this episode, and ranking it on an objective scale of 0 to 10 with only 2 points allotted for personal taste. Feel free to agree, disagree, or just learn about something new. Just be sure to tread lightly. There will be spoilers ahead. And cut to the intro. All right, welcome to the Lion's Den. So for our new listeners, we'll break down the scoring system by category as we go, but the full breakdown is available on our website. So let's get started. So this is a continuation of our previous 2 episodes of Avatar: The Last Airbender. We do them about 5 episodes at a time. So this is episodes 11 through 15. If you haven't listened to our first 2 episodes, go ahead and check those out before you listen to this one. Unless you're really familiar with the series and just want to pick up here, by all means, it's your life. Live your life. So I'm just going to read, not going to go too in depth because we do cover a lot of background on this show in the very first episode. But it's a series created by Michael Dante DiMartino and Brian Konietzko. It aired on Nickelodeon. And it's following Aang and his friends who have to defeat the Fire Lord. He's the leader of the Fire Nation. Aired originally on February 21st, 2005, and the series concluded in 2008. So if you want more facts on that, you can listen to our first episode. Today we're covering episodes 11 through 15, so we kind of group them all together. Again, there's a lot of content in this show, so we're trying to make it a little more manageable, a little more bite-sized for you guys. So we're going to start with the category of plot, story, and cohesion of just these episodes. And Tori's going to kick us off with that category.
Okay, cool. So the last place we left off, I'm just going to read from the Avatar Wiki the summary of episode 10, which was the last episode in the last chunk, which was traveling by foot. Team Avatar accidentally stumbles onto a Fire Nation camp. The soldiers immediately surround them, though the team is saved by Jet and his freedom fighters and invited back to their treetop hideout. There, the team learns about the orphans living in the woods and fighting the Fire Nation soldiers who dare to set foot in the forest. So that's kind of the summary of the last episode where we left off. So now we're picking up with episode 11. So out of 2 points for plot, story, and cohesion, I gave this 1.5 points. In these episodes, there is, again, some history that is established here. However, I believe that this chunk of episodes does that much better than other chunks of episodes. So typically I feel like sometimes the history delivery or backstories or flashbacks or however you want to call them, they can sometimes feel cumbersome, but I feel like they're done really well in this chunk of episodes. In episode 11, excuse me, in episode 11, we get the opportunity to sort of hear the history between these 2 tribes, the Zhangs and the Ganjins, and they've been feuding for like 100 years, and we kind of get that sort of backstory. So it's a little bit of world building, but it's more interesting, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But then episode 12, in the storm, Aang has a moment where he shares with Katara a lot of sort of him being told he was the Avatar, his reaction to that, him ending up running away from the air temple. And so we see some flashbacks in those moments, and I think those are told really well. And then in episode 15, Bottom of the Water Tribe, I think that we get a nice sort of, not exactly flashback, but we get some information about Katara and Sokka's family dynamic and their home a little bit more than we've had a chance to see. And I think that the delivery of that is really, really good. So what I would consider to be like the history lessons in this chunk of episodes, I feel like it's just done so well that it doesn't feel necessarily like history lessons, and I accept it a lot more. There is a really cool parallel in episode 12, which is the storm. There's a really cool way of them delivering. It's a lot of exposition in this episode. However, they deliver it really well. And there's a really cool parallel where we're getting stories about Aang and stories about Zuko. There's a lot of Zuko backstory in this episode as well, and they're almost told in parallel. And even though they grew up in completely different times, obviously they're only now kind of existing in the same timeline, it almost feels like those stories are being told in tandem, and I really like that. We see both Aang and Zuko also get challenged a little bit. Their thinking and mindset gets challenged a little bit in the midst of all this reflecting. Iroh is really the one to tell the crew in episode 12 about Zuko's backstory and like how he received the scar and his banishment. So we get all that information from Iroh's telling of it. Whereas with Aang's backstory, it's told from his perspective. But I still think it's really neat how it goes back and forth to tell us more about these two characters and really kind of fleshes out who they are as people. And also we get to see both of these characters in sort of like a bad moment or like a vulnerable moment, and yet we still kind of get, it's not a full resolution, but by the end of the episode there's still a little bit of resolution. Like both of those characters are a little bit better than the first like by the end of that episode both of those characters have grown a little bit, and I think that that's really cool. Episode 13 kind of shifts the momentum because we get the I'll talk about this a little bit more in characters, but it also shifts the momentum because the stakes feel increased because Aang is captured by Zhao, and you're like, crud, this is not supposed to happen. These are our heroes. So I think in that moment, you kind of get like a crud, is this about to launch us into something really big? Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. It gets resolved very quickly, which is why I only gave it, this is where I took off my half a point. Because I feel like this was an interesting enough momentum shift that they could have made it a little bit longer of a plot point, and it's resolved really, really quickly. Now, is it resolved satisfyingly? Yes, but I think that it almost felt too fast. So I just didn't personally like that very much. In episode 15, the gang gets split up a little bit. And I think that it's almost kind of scary feeling because it's established now that Zuko and Iroh, they have joined up with this like bounty hunter girl who has this crazy, animal monster thing called a Shirshu, and it can smell things and then track you. So Katara's being tracked. They don't know this. Our heroes don't know this. And right before they're found, they split off from Aang. And I'll talk a little bit about that too. But that splitting, I think, feels almost hopeless as a viewer because we see what's coming and they don't. I also think it's really kind of interesting the direction that they take there in that episode. And again, I'll talk about it a little bit more in characters because I think it's more of a character note. But they do some really interesting things. They kind of play up the dynamic of the grouping a little bit. And it sort of feels like you're not entirely sure what's going to happen next. And I think that's really refreshing because some of these episodes, like for instance, the episode right before it, episode 14, The Fortune Teller, it's almost like you kind of see what's coming. It's still a nice episode, but you kind of see you can kind of guess like what's going to happen. Like, it's a small problem that, they have to sort of fix on the fly. And of course they do. But the next episode feels very different because it almost feels like it could change the course of how the episodes after it proceed. And not knowing what those could look like is a little bit scary as a viewer, which I think is an interesting take. And I'm kind of glad they did it that way. At the end of the 15th episode, there's like a weird scene, and I don't know how I feel about it. And maybe you can chime in and tell me your opinion on it. But at the very end, Aang, they're all back together. Everything's good. Aang kind of realizes it was silly of him to not trust his friends, and their responsibility is very focused on helping him get to where he needs to be. And there's that nice resolution there. And Aang reveals that he took back from Zuko Katara's mother's necklace, which we've already established through the watching of this show is a very significant thing to her, and it's a significant plot point that it gets taken from her. And we know that Zuko has it, and they know that Zuko has it. and he gives it back to Katara, and Katara is obviously teasing, but she says something to Aang along the lines of, "Oh, will you please give Zuko a big kiss for me when you see him?" And she kisses Aang on the cheek, which is kind of a cute moment, but it almost feels like, I don't know how I feel about it. Is it mean of her to like tease him like that? No, I don't know how I feel about it.
No, I think she meant it sincerely. I think she was just trying to make it more, the writers, I think, were trying to make it more of a lighthearted situation versus this really like, because it's right at the tag end of an episode. It's almost like a tag at the end of the episode. It's not even really.
It's literally like the last scene.
And it's like maybe like 15 seconds of airtime. So my impression was the writers wanted to keep it kind of lighthearted because they don't want to, in a 15-second outro moment, make it this big emotional, like possibly romantic moment. I mean,
It feels weird because the episode right before that, the fortune teller, it's obviously established that Aang is starting to develop a crush on Katara, and Katara has a moment of realization toward the end where she realizes maybe she's starting to have a little bit of a crush on Aang.
No. So she doesn't realize that she's having a crush on Aang.
She realizes he's a powerful bender.
Right, which is not necessarily a reflection on how she feels about him.
That's true.
She's just saying, oh, well, maybe there is something to that.
To the fortune or whatever she got.
Right.
Okay, so that's fair. But, like, it almost feels weird coming... I think if it had not come after an episode that, like, played with the idea that Aang has a crush on Katara, it would feel more lighthearted to me. But I don't know. Something about it feels very strange, that scene.
It is kind of odd when you think about it. It never like hit me like that.
And it almost seems mean-spirited. I'm sure Katara didn't mean it that way. So I'm not to say that Katara is doing something mean-spirited to Aang, but almost feels...
She doesn't know. She doesn't know how he feels about
That's what
her.
I mean. But it seems like a strange inclusion from a writing standpoint. I don't know. Maybe I just read way too much into it.
I think you might be, and I don't think that's a bad thing. But I got the impression that she's just like making light, trying more like having, when you're young and you're a kid or a teenager, like, you'll make some kind of excuse to like, kiss a boy you like, so maybe it was more of kind of like a playful, more like a child, like maybe not like childish, but less mature kind of approach on her part where she could, give Aang a kiss to thank him without her meaning it as this big romantic thing.
She could just write it off as whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was kind of how I took it.
That's fair. Well, anyway, that was literally my last note. So out of 2 points, 1.5 for me for plot.
All right. I also gave this 1.5 points out of 2, and I'm going to go ahead and preface this with, I really only like 2 of these 5 episodes for the plot. And I think those 2 episodes that have a great plot, because if you listen to our last episode, I also gave the plot 1 out of 2 because I felt like, a little bit over half of the plot was kind of, it was okay. But the plot that is really good in this grouping is really good. And the plot that's not so good, I feel like, is really not that great at all. So we'll go with positives first. Episode 12 and 13, I think, are excellent episodes. Episode 12 is just phenomenally... It's phenomenal storytelling. The parallel between Aang's backstory and Zuko's backstory, you find that these kids, who really are, they're not adults. They're, a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old, young adolescents have gone through so much in their life. And it fleshes out, like, why they're doing what they're doing. Why does Aang feel so guilty? Why is Zuko such a jerk to his men? Like, he flat out told one of his crew, the captain of the helmsman of his ship, flat out tells him, your life doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is finding the Avatar. Like, who says that at 14? Who is that angry at 14? And we find out why. We find out what has happened to him. The story, with the way his father treated him, the way that Iroh, even when he kind of admits like he looked away, like that whole process is just so deep and so raw, like such a raw backstory for a young teenager. And then Aang, it's really the same thing. Like, here you have this kid who finds out he's the Avatar, and then really has is about to be taken away from the only family that he knows because he's the Avatar and he has to do his duty, and he's just a kid, and this confused kid just doesn't want to, be taken, so he runs away from home, and now he's got this guilt that, like, the fisherman says to him, you abandoned us for 100 years. Yeah, well, you shouldn't think you're so great. You're not the Avatar abandoned us, and look at where we are now. Holy cow, that is so much depth and weight of a plot. And I know I'm kind of getting into a little bit of the character at that point, but the way that story is told, paralleling between Aang and Zuko, and the episode's called The Storm, and that storm, it's kind of like that motif of like darkness and turmoil, and it's such beautiful storytelling. It's such a mature theme, like thematically, and the aesthetics, the visuals, like everything is just told so well. But the plot, using those plot devices and the way that story is delivered is just done so well in that episode. And even the responses of the other people, is just so well told. Katara's being there to talk to Aang, and Iroh is telling this story, kind of like you mentioned. It's just so good. And then rolling that into episode, 13? Yeah, with the Blue Spirit, like such a great concept. Aang's captured. Holy cow, they've captured the Avatar. And the fact that they've captured him, and with archers that are insanely accurate, to avoid killing him, and then have imprisoned him deliberately to avoid killing him, that's just brilliant. That's a brilliant concept and a brilliant plot. And then one person, the Blue Spirit, breaks into this high security prison. It's a prison break episode. Breaks into this high security prison and uses no bending, and then breaks Aang out of the prison. And then we find out that was Zuko the whole time. That's an incredible plot. Like, that's great plot line. It's so interesting. You're trying to figure out who this guy is. It's mysterious. Like, it's just done really well. Those two plots are just phenomenal. I think they're two of the best episodes in the whole show. And so they're really, really good. But I don't think they can carry full points for the other episodes, which I just think are not as good. I think there's a lot of kind of problems with those other 3 episodes. So after kind of hyping up those 2 episodes, the B plot of the Blue Spirit is a little like kid TV show kind of, with Sokka and Katara being sick and Momo bringing them things. It's a little campy kind of feeling, and but I think it's needed to kind of bring up the levity of the seriousness of that A plot in that episode. But the Great Divide, I think there's a reason that this is like an episode that is so panned by viewers of the show. It is horrible. It is a terrible episode. It feels like okay, so last episode I talked about things feeling like a kid's show. This episode feels like a little kid's show. It feels like we're watching, I mean, I don't even know what little kids shows are even on the air anymore, but it feels like we're watching an episode of like a show written for preschoolers. Like, it feels so dumbed down, and I can't stand it. It's like, oh, these two people they don't like each other because they're polar opposites. And oh, look, that ties into how Sokka and Katara had the exact same argument at the beginning of the episode. So of course they're going to side with each of these warring tribes that they agree with. Oh, and then how do we fix it? And then Aang tells a bold-faced lie at the end of the episode, which actually undermines the entire moral of the whole episode, which is that, hey, we made it through, we put aside our differences and made it through the canyon together. And the Aang's fabricated story about Jin Wei and Wei Jin completely undermines that. It's like, actually, you didn't need to learn a lesson that you need to set aside your differences and come together, which is a base level plot moral to begin with. actually, that's irrelevant. Let me make up a story about how your whole reason for conflict isn't even necessary. That's why you're going to come together. Not because you're actually going to be mature adults, grown adults, mind you, and put your differences aside. I'm just going to tell you how Jinwei and Weijin were little toddlers playing a soccer game, and whoop-de-doo, that saves everything. I hate it. I hate it so much. I think it's so terrible, and it's so out of character for this show. Like, I can't stand it. Like, if this was the only episode we were reviewing, I would give the plot a 0 because it's so bad. I just think it's terrible. And I do think there are some interesting things. I think the canyon guide being an earthbender is interesting. I think the interesting aspect of that both parties brought in their own food, suspecting that the other group was going to do that. I think that was kind of interesting, but overall, I think that episode is just trash. I think it's horrible. It's just horribly written. It's one-off. It's irrelevant. Nothing else happens. We have this very brief moment where Aang is kind of like, I'm supposed to help, the Avatar is supposed to bring peace, and it's like, well, sometimes you just can't make everybody happy. Like, okay, that's a little golden nugget, but I mean, it's surrounded in a bunch of like horrible plot and story. It's terrible. terrible. And then episode 14 and 15, I think that it's kind of continuing the plot of Aang like stepping into his own as the Avatar and kind of stepping into that Avatar role and putting his own personal needs to the side to be able to get a job done. The fortune teller, it's this kind of interesting, is she really a fortune teller, or we just shaped our own destiny kind of theme. And I think the part with Sokka being like logic and reason in that episode is really enjoyable. Like, that aspect of it is really comical and it's really enjoyable. But again, it just kind of feels like a Saturday morning cartoon episode. It's kind of a standalone feeling episode. It doesn't really move the plot forward a lot. It kind of delves into more of this, like, Aang has a crush on Katara. Katara doesn't know. It kind of digs more into that than actually moving the plot forward. And even then, it doesn't really dig into that well. It does a little bit with Aang, like, wanting to be, finding out if his fortune has love in his future. But then it just really completely shifts, almost instantly into the town's going to be destroyed. We have to save the town. So I don't know. It's kind of just meh. It's not a great episode, not a horrible episode. So it doesn't do a lot for me. And I just don't think that it's anything that's really unique to or distinct even from typical kids TV shows, Saturday morning cartoons. So I would just say it's kind of middle of the road. Episode 15, I really don't think this is a great plot either. It kind of just feels like a filler episode, like episode 14 and episode 11 and 14 just kind of feel like filler episodes. 15, I feel like it shows a little bit more of Katara and Sokka's like love for their tribe and their people, and it kind of gives them some highlights of, being part of the water tribe, and they meet this other water tribe member. But then it immediately like shifts into Aang lying about information about their father because he's worried about being left out. He feels all left out. And to me, that almost seems a little bit out of character for Aang. Like, and it's just kind of a moment of, I get that it's kind of this episode themed around Aang kind of having this moment of weakness and feeling like he's not acting trustworthy when he should. And then it kind of, again, we have this dramatic shift into, and then there's danger. So it's like we're starting to explore these kind of interesting character qualities in the plot, and then we shift into danger. It almost feels like a rinse and repeat of the previous episode, where it's like, we're going to come into some plot, moving our characters' growth plot forward, and then we're going to bring in some conflict. Again, it just kind of feels like just a rinse and repeat typical Saturday morning cartoon plot. But I do think the plot of June with the Shearshu as the bounty hunter and Iroh and Zuko chasing them, I think that's interesting. I think there's interesting elements of that plot. And with I think it's great. We get to highlight Sokka's cleverness and, using the perfumes to confuse the Shearshu and, the way that they have, they almost separate the group and then they actually decide, no, Aang needs us. We're going to come back together. We're going to choose helping the Avatar over reuniting with our father. That, plot-wise kind of brings them back together. Again, it's a little bit mix of kind of a character versus plot. But the overarching plot of the story really just feels like cartoon TV show episodes that don't really feel like they've contributed a lot to the plot overall. Again, I think that they just feel kind of kids show and kind of tropey. The delivery's good. It's still consistent. It feels like an Avatar: The Last Airbender episodes. But I think those 3 episodes compared to episodes 12 and 13 just really almost don't even feel like it's in the same show, because I just think the plot of episodes 12 and 13 are so good, and episodes 11, 14, and 15 just feel like normal, typical kids TV show, Saturday morning cartoon. So that's why I gave it 1.5 out of 2. And before we move to the next category, I did want to say, I do think that it would have been interesting to keep Aang captured longer.
Yeah.
However, because we know in hindsight there's 3 seasons, I think that it would have been way too early to capture Aang and hold him captured, because you don't have any way to rescue him other than, beyond a 1 episode time limit.
Right.
Because your main cast hasn't grown and developed enough to even do it. Like, if the Blue Spirit hadn't come in and rescued Aang, like, Katara and Sokka wouldn't have done it. They wouldn't have even had the feasible means to at this juncture.
Maybe I think they could have maybe resolved it then if they had moved that episode just slightly toward the end of the season a little bit more than perhaps, so that the stakes feel even higher because they're that close to their goal. Maybe just the way it was placed is what is another part of the problem, because again, I think it's not a bad episode. Like you said, I agree with all your points, but I just wish there was more. Like, I wish we had gotten more of that.
Yeah.
So.
Okay,
so for characters, we have 3 allotted points, and I gave them 2.5 out of 3 points for characters. I think it's mostly positive here in this chunk of episodes, but I do have a few problems. I will talk about the negatives first, I think, which is maybe unusual. I think I usually talk about the positives first. So first negative is episode 11 is really not a great episode. I don't really care about any of these secondary characters that we see, these 2 tribes. Like, they're both really annoying, and I just want them to shut up. I think what they really tried to do with Aang too fell flat. So I think the purpose here was that they were supposed to give Aang the opportunity to exert his authority and mediation as the Avatar. And he did his best. However, all these people suck. So it still felt like they were trying too hard to make this like a funny, campy, like cartoony fight between these 2 tribes, that the moments that they attempted to give Aang to further his character growth as the Avatar just completely get lost. So I really was kind of disappointed in that. I think that the other negative that I have is in episode 14, which is the fortune teller. And most of it is kind of centered around the fact that Aunt Wu kind of sucks. Sorry, I don't know how else to say that, but like, she's obviously not 100% truthful, right? Like, did anybody get that other than me? And here's another problem. It has already been established previously in the show that Sokka has a very good sense of discernment and should be listened to when he says something is not right.
Right, we just covered that in episode 10.
We just covered that in episode 10. And here we are 4 episodes later, and Sokka's like, yo, this is not right. You guys are being ridiculous. And everybody just dismisses him again, including Aang and Katara. And I'm like, we just learned this lesson. Why did we dismiss that? So that's frustrating to me in episode 14. So those are the negatives. Here's some positives. I think, and it's a very quick moment. And I think if you weren't familiar with the show, you would probably miss this episode, or I'm sorry, this moment. But in a valuable rewatch moment is in episode 12 of The Storm, and we're getting the backstory of Zuko getting his scar, getting banished, and the whole Agni Kai situation that he went through. And there is a moment where you see a very important character that's not yet been introduced standing next to Iroh, grinning. And it's so stark, and I think starts the story of that character, and we don't even know her yet. And I just think it's a great moment. It's a great moment. So yeah, if you're rewatching it, that moment is significant. Also, the intro of the Blue Spirit is incredible. I think the Blue Spirit is one of the most interesting characters in the show. There's so much like mystery. You don't understand the motivation behind this character. You're not sure if this character is an enemy or an ally. Turns out to be an ally, then turns out to be Zuko, and you're like, I'm so confused about like what the angle is here, because as a viewer, you've already been established like, this is not your friend. And so you get confused. It's almost like you start to question the motivations, but not in like a terrible way. I just think it's like a really good, like sort of mystery unfolding, revealing sort of situation. Zhao continues to suck. And in the Blue Spirit episode, that maybe this is also a negative, so I forgot to mention this earlier. I don't mind the B plot at all. Like you said, it brings a little bit of levity to what's kind of been a heavy couple episodes, with Sokka and Katara being sick. However, the Momo stuff, it's funny like the first 2 times that Momo brings back something that's not water. And then when we get to like the 6th time of Katara being like, no, Momo, water. I'm like, okay, I'm done with that now. The joke has been beaten to the ground at that point, and it's just no longer funny. And I feel like Momo is obviously like a pretty small character. Like he's there all the time, but obviously doesn't like contribute a lot. And then they just made him even stupider than he already was in that episode. And I was like, you're not doing anybody any favors. So sucks about that. As far as the like characters of the week that we get in the fortune teller episode, I think Ming is a really cute like little character. And I think there's like a couple really good like dialogue moments with Ming. However, she's kind of creepy, and I wish that they had these nice little wholesome moments, not under the pretense of this girl's basically been stalking Aang. But it also kind of stems back to the fact that like Aunt Wu kind of sucks. So like she's just like drilled into Ming's head that like she's going to marry a man with big ears. So like every boy that comes through with big ears, she's just going to like glom onto. And it's just like, ugh. And then I don't know. It all boils down to Aunt Wu being the problem. And then really my last note is in episode 15. So in the Bato of the Water Tribe episode, like Aang obviously does something really cruddy, and it's out of character for him to pout in that way. It seems so strange that he would take what to me sounds like a perfectly normal thing to say. You haven't seen your father in 2 years. Of course you would want to see him. But they never say, we're going to stop what we're doing and go see him. They never resolve to do that before Aang just pouts and leaves. And it's just not an Aang thing to do. So part of me doesn't really buy it. And I continue to not buy it when he's over pouting on the beach, and then the messenger comes up and says, hey, can you please give this to Bato? And he's like, yeah, okay. And then he realizes that it's the map they've been waiting for. And then he just crumples it up and puts it into his, like, clothes. And I'm like, why are we just like breaking established character things? Because so if Aang had made the decision to do these actions, okay, I get it. Like maybe like you said, it's just a moment of weakness. You know, he's feeling like, crud, maybe I'm more alone in this than I thought. Like we get it. We all have moments of weakness. However, it would make more sense from Aang's character perspective if he had crumpled the map and then immediately felt guilty and pulled it out of his clothes and tried to smooth it back out and, something like that. But for him to hide it for as long as he does and then be like, you can't trust me. I'm just like, I'm sounding way more negative than I thought. It's just, I think it's a really interesting thing that they tried to do. It just fell a little flat because it's so unlike Aang. I like the fact that the guilt sort of eats away at him, so he does eventually confess. I think that that is a better ending than if Aang had continued to keep the secret, obviously. So I do appreciate that they at least let Aang circle back enough to his own character that the guilt was just eating away at him, that he eventually did have to come clean. So I like that we did sort of get to that point, but it was just like messy in the middle. So I didn't really like that either. I know that my chunk of critiques here does make it sound a little bit more negative than I intend. I still gave it 2.5 points out of 3 for characters because I think the good moments really outshine the bad moments. There's just quite a few small weird character moments that I wanted to bring up. But I think, honestly, like the introduction of the Blue Spirit, like that whole episode is just such a great character moment. We get these great character dynamics between Zhao and Aang and Zuko. We even get to see character dynamics between like Zhao and the other general right before Zhao is promoted to admiral. And we get to see that like Zhao really does not give a care to anybody. It's not just towards Zuko that he acts this way. He is really that ruthless and uncaring toward everybody in the Fire Nation. Like he just has his one goal, and that's the only thing he is concerned with. So I think just those moments are really, really good. And then, like you said, the highlights of this chunk are definitely episodes 12 and 13. And I think a lot of that is the character moments. Yeah, so 2.5 points out of 3.
Alrighty, well, I gave this 2 points out of 3 for characters, and I agree with a lot of the notes that you mentioned. In episode 11, the 2 tribes, I can't stand them. My note literally says, ugh, boring. Like, they're horrible, they're boring, they're just completely unlikable, and I can't stand them. Those two tribes. They're just completely one note. It's like our one character quality is we're clean, and our one character quality is we're dirty. Like, can you be any more flat and boring? Like, we couldn't come up with any, and we're holding a grudge for ever and ever because it's tradition, because of this ancient ritual that was ruined. Like, it's so unbelievably, like, it's unbelievable, and then it's boring. Like, you don't care about any of them. You don't care if they ever resolve their conflict or not by the end of it. Like, technically, they don't even need to resolve their conflict because guess what? They get through the cavern and then, boom, they're on their way. But it's just, I can't go on about it anymore because it's just that bad. Some other side characters in episode 12, I think the fisherman and his wife are pretty good catalysts for that story, and as far as explaining kind of more into Aang's guilt in that episode. And also in that episode, I like how we're contrasting, we're revealing more about Aang's guilt, and we're also revealing more about Zuko's honor. And to kind of go to Zuko for a minute here, that whole episode with his backstory, how he doesn't care about his crew's safety, but yet, and how he's, his mantra over and over again is he has to capture the Avatar to restore his honor. And yet in his backstory, we're seeing how much honor he has. The fact that he stood up in the war room to defend those soldiers who were going to, be put on the front lines just as fodder, cannon fodder. He stood up for them. He gets to the Agni Kai and finds out he's supposed to fight his own father, and he refuses to do it, saying, I'm your son and I'm loyal to you. I'm not gonna fight you. I mean, so much honor that we're witnessing in Zuko. It's almost like, yes, he's kind of scarred by life, and I don't mean that ironically as a pun, but here we're watching a teenager who's gone through like horrible circumstances, and yet we see the kind of honor he had before those circumstances that even led up to those circumstances. And it's like, how this kid has so much honor, he doesn't even need it restored at this point. Like, we're seeing that now, and then we're also seeing how evil the Fire Lord is in contrasting to that. Like, Zuko being forced to duel his own father, and his father like permanently scarring his face and then banishing him and then sending him on an impossible quest. Like, how horrible of a dad do you have to have? And if he's that ruthless with his own child, imagine how ruthless this man is as the leader of the Fire Nation. I mean, evil man. So it sets up Zuko more, and your main villain of the Fire Lord. And then it also gives us some really interesting intricacies into Iroh as he's telling this story, like his perspective of this and the guilt that he kind of feels in that as well. And then the Blue Spirit with Zuko as well. It shows us his kind of capabilities as not just, you know, a firebender, but his whole like prison breakout is done without firebending at all. So he's got a lot of skill there. It almost makes it interesting that way back in episode like 1 or 2, like, how did he get beat by Aang, like, and hit by a boomerang when he has this much skill? Like, later on we find out how skilled of a warrior he is there. And then of course Iroh in that episode as well, you know, is seen that he knows, well, and episode 15, you know, Iroh knows that Zuko needs his help even when Zuko doesn't know that he needs his help, and he's willing to, you know, continually lend a hand and be supportive to Zuko. And then we also see him redirect lightning in that episode as well, which is really interesting because I think that's the first time we see electricity as a potential alternative to firebending, or, you know, capability with firebending as well, which is interesting. With Aang, I think that we're trying in these episodes to have him make peace and be the Avatar. But, you know, I don't think him lying to the tribes is really in character with him. And I agree. I don't think that him being deceptive to Sokka and Katara makes a lot of sense either. It really feels out of character. So I agree with a lot of those notes that you gave as well. But I do think it's interesting in episode 12, we see that he does continue to have guilt. And then it's really interesting that in processing through this story of why he, you know, ran away and how he feels about that, I think that it was really great to have him be able to process that with Katara and then choose to put the past behind him and move forward. And I think that's a very interesting aspect of his character because Aang is so lighthearted and carefree. We see that he does have genuine, serious, you know, thoughts and feelings, and yet he's making the choice to move on. And I think it does a great job of establishing him right there. He's not going to be this like brooding, depressed character through the rest of the show.
There's no angst in Aang really at all. Right,
exactly. Except in episode 15 when he's like angsty about Sokka and Katara wanting
which
to
is
see
out
his
of character.
dad, which just doesn't seem right. I agree. And then I think he has that great moment with Zuko at the very end of the Blue Spirit where he says, you know, I used to have friends all over the Fire Nation. Like, it would be great if we could have been friends, you know? So even in his like worst enemy, this man who's hunting him down all over the world, he's saying, you know, I'd be willing to give you a chance. I mean, he literally saved Zuko's life right there because he could have left him to be captured by Zhao, and yet he didn't. So even in then, we're seeing Aang extend, you know, an olive branch to his own enemies even in that moment. I think it's just a great moment for him there. Katara, I think, is pretty consistent in this episode, except, like you said, like in... Wow. I think Katara is pretty consistent in this episode, except that Sokka and Katara in the Bato of the Water Tribe episode, there's this scene where they're sitting there having a conversation with Bato, and they're talking about all these Water Tribe specific, you know, topics, and they're like aggressively brushing Aang off and shutting him down. It's like, it's a long story. We'll tell you about it later. Oh, don't touch that, Aang. Oh, it's not a big deal. Oh, you had to be there. Like, it to the point where it just sounds, it doesn't even seem real. Like, if you had a friend who's the Avatar, and you're going with him up to the North Pole to learn how to waterbend, and to take him to learn how to waterbend, and now you have like a replica of a tribal home with someone from your home village, and you have somebody who's genuinely curious to learn about your life and your background. Are you really gonna like shut them down and be like, shut up, go sit in the corner, the adults are talking here? Like, it was so contrived to me in that moment. It just seemed completely out of character for them. And then for them to be like, we can't trust you, I guess we'll have to part ways. Like, that just sounded, even just felt so ridiculous. Like, why would the Katara that's going to voluntarily go to a Fire Nation prison ship to release Earthbender she's just met, why is she now abandoning the Avatar because of one bump in the road? It just seems so inconsistent for them as well. But one thing I did want to note about Sokka in a positive is in episode 14 with the fortune teller, so going back an episode, the fact that he's constantly this like voice of reason and logic is, one, it's pretty entertaining for the episode, and it's consistent with his character, and I really enjoy that aspect of the episode, even though I'm not a big fan of the episode as a whole. I do like that aspect a lot. But one thing I noticed in this rewatch is that here Sokka is trying to convince these people that they're being duped by this fortune teller. You know, it's like, I bet Aunt Wu told you that if you wore those shoes, you'd meet the love of your life when you're wearing them. And I bet you've never taken them off. And he's like, nope, I wear them every day. And he's like, well, then of course the fortune's gonna come true. Here he is just like raging at these people that are being, you know, he, in his perspective, are being completely scammed by this fortune teller. And yet, when he finds out that their whole village is going to be destroyed by a volcano, and that Aunt Wu was wrong about the volcano not destroying the village because it's about to erupt, his reaction isn't, well, they deserve it.
Right.
Like, it would be so, like, it's just such a great aspect of Sokka's character that the same Sokka that wanted to save this Fire Nation village from being destroyed and all these people from drowning by a dam being blown up, that guy, even when he's going toe to toe with these people and thinks all these people are just completely stupid for believing a fortune teller, when it comes down to the wire, he's going to do what it takes to save these people that are being, in his mind, being duped by this fortune teller. And I think it's funny that at the end you're like, was Aunt Wu right all along? But even still, I think that it's a great moment in his character where even when he's right and these people are gonna, you know, get their village destroyed by a volcano, by a bunch of lava, he's there to help with that as well. But yeah, otherwise, I think a lot of the secondary characters like Aunt Wu and Bato are just really not memorable. They're pretty forgettable characters. The herbalist, the crazy cat lady herbalist in episode 13, you know, I mean, she's kind of comical in the moment. Again, I think it helps add levity, but, you know, pretty boring. The archers are really interesting characters in the sense that they're really skilled, but again, they don't even speak, pretty, you know, don't really add a whole lot. I think that June and the Shirshu are good, you know, addition to the team tracking down Aang. I think it's a good addition to that. I enjoyed that aspect, that additional character, I mean to say. But overall, I think a lot of the character choices, like the inconsistencies, are why I couldn't really give it a full 3 points. But one thing I did want to touch on, we don't talk about this a lot. I think you mentioned it in our last episode about the voice acting being so good. And one thing I did want to note is that Dante Bosco, who voices Zuko, when he voices the younger version of Zuko in those flashback episodes, I just think he does a great job.
He's fantastic. He's just 10 out of 10.
Yeah. He's just excellent. He's sounds excellent. Like a younger version of Zuko, a Zuko who has more innocence to him. I mean, he adds so much into just those few lines and that little bit of voice acting. It's just phenomenal. It just
Dante Basco would be like one of those voice actors I'd want to meet one day. Like, You know what I mean? Like, he's just like iconic.
So if anybody's listening and wants to invite him onto our podcast, we would love to have him.
We would love to interview you, Dante.
Yeah.
If you'd be willing.
Yep. You're a 10 out of 10, but for me, the characters in this are 2 out of 3 for me.
Okay, fair. Okay, so the next category is aesthetics. So out of 2 points, I gave it 1.5. I really only have one negative, and that's the reason that I couldn't give it a full 2 points, and it really comes down to the fortune teller episode. I'm sorry, but it is kind of boring cinematically. The only really good shot, I think, in that entire episode, well, I'll take it back, there's 2, is when Aang throws the bone on the fire, and it basically like explodes. That's a really cool shot. And then at the very end, when Aang does his airbending to basically build a to cool the lava that's spilling over onto the village. Those are really the only 2. Those are like 2 pretty good shots in that episode, but for overall, I feel like it's kind of boring, and that's why I couldn't give it full 2 points. However, I do think a lot of the aesthetics are really good. I actually want to give props to something in episode 11, which I think we both objectively agree is the worst episode amongst these 5. But in The Great Divide, when each tribe is telling their version of the story, it's a very different and distinct art style, and I think it's so clever
I agree.
To tell it that way.
I completely agree. I wrote that note down too. I thought it was great.
It's really the only good thing I think about that episode is that the art styles get so different that, you're very obviously watching like something, it's meant to stand apart from what we've been watching. And I just think that's really, really cool and creative. I do want to talk about specifically the cinematography. And when I say cinematography, I understand that this is an animated show. So you don't have like a physical camera that you're like zooming in and out of actors. But I still think that there is a level of cinematography in planning your shots as an animator, because you are choosing angles, things like establishing shots, close-ups, those sorts of things. Those are all choices that you make as an animator that I think classify as cinematography, even if there is not a physical camera that you are moving around a set.
Well, but even in animation, and I don't know if this was used for this show, but even in animation that looks 2D style, they actually do, in 3D animation, they do, and in a lot of 2D animation, or a lot of 2D animation is still done with the same technology, there is a physical camera. I mean, it's not a physical camera, but it's a digital version of a camera. So you build the world in the computer, and then you have the opportunity to move the camera, which is what you're going to see on the screen. So you do technically, in a digital means, have like a camera, at least to my understanding. So,
right. Yes.
I don't know if they used that for this show, because I know it looks like a 2D style, but the way that 2D animation has changed over time.
That's a good point. I don't know enough about animation.
It's not necessarily like paper, being photographed anymore. So it could be that they had the capability to, construct a flat 2D structured world, but still use that 3D cinematography aspect of it.
That's fair. Then I'll just call it what it is, which is cinematography. So
I don't think all that to say, I don't think it's wrong for you to call it cinematography, because in most animation now, it does follow the same process.
That's fair. So then I want to talk about the cinematography in episode 12, specifically surrounding Zuko's Agni Kai. There are a lot of really interesting choices that they make in regards to how that whole section of Zuko's past is told. Some shots are in complete black and white, which I think is really interesting. There is obviously a lot of use of fire, but that fire is obviously... It's so strange to describe it this way, but all of the fire motifs that you see in those scenes feel cold. If flames could feel cold, they do in those shots. There's no like warmth or like friendliness to any of it. It's all just like power and control like these are kind of like the feelings you get through those shots, and I think it's so interesting. They also time and pace these shots with the voiceover of Iroh telling the story, and just the use of the black and white, the shadows, those sorts of things. It feels very, very cinematic, and I love it. I think it's great. It's strange how they almost give a more cinematic approach to Zuko's like backstory and not so much to Aang's backstory. Like, obviously Aang's backstory is important and I think it's interesting, but they don't shoot it, for lack of a better term, in the same way that they do the Agni Kai. I don't know why that is, but I found it really interesting and really like gripping almost to watch that part.
Well, I think it makes it more dramatic. I think the story is more dramatic, meaning it's more of a drama. Mm-hmm. So I think it's appropriate.
Yeah. So I just really enjoyed that. Also, I thought it was really cool. I didn't know where else to put this, so I put it here. I don't know if it technically would count as a character note or not. I put it under aesthetics because it really has to do with like the combat and like fighting in episode 15. But this is the first time that we see Appa really step forward as like a fighter of the crew. And I think up until now, we've just sort of seen Appa as like the cute, like, transportation of the team who sleeps and eats a lot, and that's about all he does. And now we get an opportunity where Appa recognizes that there is a danger and there is a threat here, and he can be useful in that way, and he engages the Shirshu, which I think is interesting. We've never seen Appa like
animals in combat,
right? So, and we've never seen Appa take the initiative to engage offensively against a threat. And I think it's kind of a cool thing to see, especially because they're pretty evenly matched in the beginning, until he basically, the Shirshu, does his little poison tongue thing or whatever and sort of paralyzes Appa. But until that point happens, it's like you're watching this and you're like, whoa, like Appa's really holding his own, like, and again, you think of airbenders and the flying bison as kind of the like peaceful I guess nation, and so you don't expect that sort of thing from Appa. So when you see it happen, you at the same time, it sort of makes you realize that like Appa understands that there's a need here, and so he's gonna fill it. This is why I think Appa is a better character than Momo, if you can really consider Momo a character, because obviously Momo's a dumb idiot lemur, and he's trying his best, but Momo does not really. I mean, I think there's like one portion, I can't remember what episode it's in, it may be in previous chunks, where like, oh yeah, it is in previous chunks, when Katara is like tied to a tree and Momo comes down and like breaks her bonds or whatever. That's like the only significant thing that Momo has done up to now.
He brought her a tiara when she asked for water.
Wow, great. But you know what I mean? Like, comparatively, like, Appa is obviously like super useful to the team, and it's really interesting to kind of see combat. We've seen combat a lot, obviously, so far in the show, based around weaponry or bending. We have not yet seen animal combat, and this is kind of our first opportunity to do that, and I think it's really good, and a really cool choice that they made to have Appa be the one to step forward in this moment when the others could not. So I really liked that, and so because of that, I gave it 1.5 points out of 2.
Alrighty, I gave this 2 points out of 2, and I realize I keep that's been the very consistent score that I've been giving aesthetics in the previous 2 episodes. I've just given it full points for aesthetics, and I think that as I continue to watch these episodes, the creative team that's doing the visuals for the show continue to do new things, and I think that is just, they keep stepping up the bar and upping the ante. I agree. I think that some of these episodes in this chunk are less cinematic than others. Some of them feel more kind of like just a run-of-the-mill cartoon show, like the Fortune Teller episode, or The Great Divide, versus something like The Storm, which is very dynamic storytelling visually. But I do have a couple, just positives that really stuck with me. I really don't have a lot of negatives, but just a couple things that I just think stand out aesthetically. The score in episode 13 is so good. It's so dramatic, and it helps build that tension and add to the mystery of who the heck is this blue spirit masked guy. I mean, it's just so interesting that not only is it different because we have the introduction of this new character, but it's also so well fits the tone of Aang being captured in this Fire Nation prison without it being so dark that you're like depressed or scared watching that episode. So it does a great balance of tension while not driving you further into this is really bad or really dark too quickly. The creature design, I think, is really good with those canyon crawlers in episode 11. Even though we have both kind of knocked on episode 11, The Great Divide, I think the design of the canyon crawlers is really interesting. Those are scary looking creatures. If I was traveling somewhere and those things were the natural inhabitants of that area, I would find an alternative. I would not be going through the Great Divide. Like, those things are terrifying. They're like spider-esque looking like monsters. Like, oh my gosh. Like, it's a kid's show, so it's not too terrifying. But in rewatching this, I was like, that is really good creature design there. Another great creature is the Shearshoe. It's just, I think it's a brilliant creature design. I like that it's kind of this anteater looking creature, but it is blind, and yet it has just black fur that kind of comes across where its eyes would be as like a mask. So it literally doesn't have eyes. It sees only with scent. That's just clever design. And then it has this anesthetic tongue, and kind of what you mentioned, I think it's a great concept. And maybe this would fall more into plot or character, I don't know, but I would say aesthetics, because it's more of like creature design. It's not really a character. It's not really a plot. But the fact that when it's fighting Appa, and Appa gets hit by its tongue, they even factor in the fact that Appa is huge. He's not going to be sedated or paralyzed in the same way that a human getting hit with that. So they really thought through this process of these really significant creatures, even to the platypus bear that's attacking the guy in The Fortune Teller. So the creature design in Avatar is just so good. Yeah. And they continue to raise the bar for themselves and bring out these new character, like creature characters for us. Again, I did make the note as well. You already touched on it, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse. But the episode 11, where they do that different artistic style with the storytelling, I just think it's so good. And they also do kind of a different artistic style in The Storm when they're telling Zuko's backstory versus Aang's backstory. Aang's backstory has kind of this, almost this fog, ethereal kind of filter to it, where it feels like you're up in the clouds. And then Zuko's has very harsh, very dynamic reds and tones, and the aesthetic of the war room where the Fire Lord is sitting and all the generals are meeting is just really imposing. It looks like not just a nation's warlord, but even your world's villain warlord would sit in a place like that. So I like the design of that as well. And then of course, there's some moments like when Aang sees the food in episode 11 and he gets those kind of anime style eyes, the use of that anime style that keeps coming into play it's really entertaining. I think it adds a lot of levity there. There in episode 12 in The Storm, when the fisherman accuses Aang of, you're the Avatar, you abandoned us for 100 years. They actually do a Hitchcock zoom on Aang in that moment. And it really adds a lot of dynamic feel. And it really pulls you into what Aang is feeling. I thought that was a great cinematic choice there. And of course, the story ambiance in that episode of The Storm, you could call it kind of tropey because, they're having an internal storm while there's an external storm. But I think it works. It works. It's done very well.
It's one of those like tropes that's executed well. So.
Yeah, and it's a trope for a reason. And I think that it's pretty appropriate when you get a bunch of people that can't go outside because it's raining, and you've got these people that just had some dynamic conflict happen in their life, and now they're all stuck sitting together, and the conversation's going to kind of move in that direction. So it's a good use of that for plot and aesthetics as well. Also, the contrast in the use of fire and shadow on Iroh and the crew members when that story's being told, I just think is really aesthetically pleasing. You have these stark shadows on Iroh's face while he's telling the story. It kind of gives you this, it adds intensity to the story, but then it's also kind of, in a way, it's symbolic. Like, he's talking about a very dark part of Zuko's past, and they're the Fire Nation, and so that kind of balance of light and darkness, and contrasting that aesthetic with, like you said, that black and white of the Agni Kai is just, it's a very dynamic storytelling. Like you said, I think it's very cinematic. I really like the design of the herbalist's house in the Blue Spirit episode. I think it's a great design. I noticed, I think probably for the first time, just the way that the exterior shot, that establishing shot of the exterior of her house, and then you go into her little, herbalist room or whatever. It's really, really cleverly done. And it's almost a shame that it's not shown for maybe more than, a few seconds on screen, but a lot of thought,
total seconds.
Yeah, a lot of thought went into that, and I appreciated it. With combat in episode 13 with the Blue Spirit, I love the slow-mo that they use in the combat there.
There's a lot of really cool, I didn't talk about it, but there's like a lot of really cool like tandem fighting that Aang and the Blue Spirit do together that's just really pleasing.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that to me is just so interesting to watch, because I think that, way back in the beginning 5 episodes we reviewed, I kind of mentioned how the bending styles are just done so well, and they're so well done and thorough. And now you kind of fast forward to here and episode 13 with the Blue Spirit, and now you have combat with no bending, so you have Aang, who's, he's airbending, but you have the Blue Spirit who is doing no bending whatsoever. It's just swordplay, and even back in last episode of our podcast, episode 10 with Jet, like, he's not a bender, and here his combat is. So I think it helps to flesh out your world, and it gives your benders formidable opponents, but it's done so beautifully and so realistically that it also kind of gives you confidence in somebody like Sokka, who's on the team, who's not a bender. Like, oh, well, if Jet is fighting, Katara and Aang, and they're having a hard time against him, then, Sokka would be able to hold his own against a bender. So I think the fighting combat is just really good. And then even moving into episode 15, that combat between Aang and Zuko is just really interesting to watch. It's not just blasting fire and air balls at each other. It's, they're literally moving around each other, and Zuko's movements are very much in the style of somebody who is a firebender, even if he's not actually shooting fire, and Aang's movements are very much that airbending kind of moving fluidly around him, particularly when they're fighting on the well and Aang gets the necklace from Zuko, is just a really great and interesting moment to watch. It's combat, I think, in cartoons can be very boring and very stale, and it's like a bunch of explosions or a bunch of laser guns, or, even just like punches and kicks that are done like comic book style with just like splash backgrounds and, rapid fire fists. And I think the combat in this, even just in these few episodes, have just continued to kind of up the ante and set the bar for animation, even if it's quote unquote children's animation. So that all is really good. So I just think that all of that, just because it's continuing to show more, and it's not the same old every section that we're reviewing, that I think that's why I keep giving it a 2 out of 2, because I keep finding new things that they didn't show in the last chunk of episodes. Now they're showing new things here. The only CGI that I really noticed in this chunk was the skull cloud in the fortune
14.
teller episode. I like to try and see in watching traditional animations if I can tell where there's CGI that added to like 2D style, and it's kind of a game I like to play with myself. So I think that's the only CG that I noticed there. But if you're listening and you are aware of other things that I may have missed in these episodes, please feel free to reach out on social media, because I just think it's fun to catch that stuff. But 2 out of 2 for aesthetics for me.
Okay, so next is personal taste and preference. So out of 2 points, I gave this full 2 points, actually. These episodes really hold my attention much better. That is something I've mentioned before in previous Avatar episodes, that is sometimes a problem for me, is that like sometimes my focus will stray during Avatar episodes. That happened some in the last chunk. This chunk, though, I'm pretty engaged the whole time through. I think the only episode that I sort of space out is episode 11, because I just don't like any of those people. But other than that, I feel like the storytelling is gripping enough in these like chunks of episodes that it's either weighty enough that I'm like following because I'm invested, or I think it's kind of silly enough that I'm at least entertained enough to continue focused on it. So I really enjoy that. For some reason, you're probably going to laugh at me about this or think I'm dumb. But one of the funniest things to me in this entire chunk of episodes is the fact that in the Blue Spirit episode, Aang is so focused on getting those dang frozen wood frogs, and he finally gets them back to Katara and Sokka, and they are literally sucking on these frogs. And for some reason, I think it's hilarious, and I always laugh out loud at the very end of the episode when they're sucking on those frogs. It's so dumb, but I think it's just so funny. It's like one of my favorite like jokes in the whole season is those stupid frozen wood frogs. It's just so ridiculously funny, and like one of those like oddball jokes that like you just don't really understand, but I think it's funny anyway. So yeah, I don't really have a lot to say, just that I think that these are a better chunk of episodes in the first season. So I have no qualms against any of them, and I like rewatching these episodes, particularly like you said. I think that episodes 12 and 13 are some of the best in the season, and definitely worth rewatching over and over again. So 2 out of 2 for me.
Alrighty, so for this chunk of episodes, I just gave it 1 out of 2 points for this. I really, kind of like my last episode, I only really liked 2 of these 5 episodes in this stretch, which was 12 and 13, and I really don't like the other 3. The fortune teller, sometimes I kind of have to be in the mood for it, but I pretty much always skip episode 11 and episode 15. I really don't like them. It's all the way to I dislike those episodes, and it's not common for me to really dislike Avatar: The Last Airbender episodes, but I really don't like those episodes. I think that some of the decisions just made for the plot and the characters in those 2 episodes are just either boring or inconsistent, or they just don't hold my attention. I pretty much always skip them when I rewatch them if I'm not watching them with other people that want to. But episodes 12 and 13 are just, in my opinion, they're just some of my favorite episodes. Like, period. I think they're just done so well. But I don't like them enough to give it full 2 out of 2 points for me. So 1 out of 2 for personal taste and preference. I think that 12 and 13, not only are they they're probably my 2 favorite episodes in season 1, but they're probably in my top favorite-ish number of episodes in the whole show. I just think they're done really well. So 1 out of 2 for me.
Okay. And finally, as always, last category is creativity. And I gave it a full point for this. I think that they're starting to play around more. We're getting a lot more like diverse cinematography at this point. We're getting sort of these new ideas as far as like villains go. Like we sort of get like a character of the week villain in June, which is something that we haven't really explored a lot. All the other characters of the week so far that we've gotten have been pretty like positive characters or neutral characters, and then now we have like an actual bounty hunter who's like trying to hunt them down, and I thought that was kind of an interesting new thing to do. I think to its benefit, the show has kind of found its place where now it can start to experiment instead of just tell the story. Now it's going to try to do that in like new and different ways, and it doesn't always land. For example, episode 11, it doesn't really land the same way, but at least they tried something different with like the art styles and things. So I don't have a ton to say other than, I think that because they are showing a little bit more freedom in how they deliver things at this point of the show, it is creative. And I have to give it points for balancing the new creative things with the humor and sort of the heavy, weighty backstories and serious things from our characters as well. So 1 out of 1 point for me.
Alrighty. I actually gave this half a point out of 1 for creativity. I think that a good stretch of these episodes don't really do a lot that's new as far as new for the show as a whole. I think that there are aspects of it that are, like I said, I think that like aesthetically they keep doing new and different takes on things, but in general, what I did kind of see as creative aspects that I thought merited points were Aang getting captured and being kept alive, and the fact that he's not being killed specifically because they don't want the Avatar to reincarnate. So I thought that was brilliant, and for them to introduce that so early in the show is just really genius. And the fact that you've not just made Zhao this ruthless, unlikable villain, but he's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Because
a smart villain is a scary villain.
Yeah. So you're kind of up the ante there for your villain, but that's just really great ingenuity of the plot, especially this early in the show. Because I feel like that's something that many shows would have, the bad guys trying to kill Aang, and your average, like your adult viewers would be like, why would they want to kill him? He's just going to reincarnate and they have to start all over again. And your typical kids TV show would be like, kids won't think about that. We don't need to address that. So I just think it's creative to not just address that, but to actually make that a plot point.
Like a reason behind a decision.
Right. And then another thing is the way I thought they were very creative in giving Zuko a backstory that's very tragic, and it explains a lot about him, but it doesn't excuse anything. So they don't take Zuko and give him this terrible, tragic backstory about how he's a villain, but he's just misunderstood. No, he's still making decisions that are poor. He's still making poor decisions. And Iroh, as his kind of mentor, is still correcting him on poor decisions and acknowledging that him verbally disregarding the life of his crew is not an okay thing to do. And then Zuko coming around and making the decision to value his men's lives.
And not only that, but apologizing to Iroh.
Right. So here you have this tragic villain backstory, and yet we didn't just erase all of his poor decisions and now we've excused every poor decision he's made because, well, it's not his fault. Like, no, he's still accountable for his actions.
Right.
And he still has to make, if he wants to be a good person, you have to make good choices. So I think that that's really unique to media in general, but even children's media, where it would be so easy and typical in media to have your villain who's horrible, and then we give them a tragic backstory, and now that immediately excuses all of their bad behavior. And I like that they didn't do that they didn't just tell that backstory, and now Zuko's this guy we're supposed to like. He's still a villain that we're supposed to root against because we want Aang to succeed, but it gives him more depth of character. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one reason that Zuko is a popular character, because they don't excuse his behavior. And
and I think it his best growth comes in the moments where he is held accountable for his actions and resolves to do better. Even if his choices are motivated by a goal that goes against our heroes, at least on a personal note, he resolves to do it a better way. You know what I mean?
Right. And we're watching him make decisions that after we've seen what his father did to him, he's making decisions that are not what his dad would have done.
Correct.
He's following that mentorship that Iroh brings to the table.
Which is why I think Iroh is such an important character in this show. Mm-hmm. Like, the entire show would be different if Iroh was not there. It
would. Yeah, absolutely. But overall, those kind of two aspects, I think, to me, I think that merited about half a point for creativity, because those are kind of two small aspects that I think are unique in this chunk of episodes compared to kind of typical media of the same caliber, as well as looking at the series as a whole. So half a point out of 1 for creativity for me.
All right, so that makes your overall score.
So my overall score for Avatar Season 1, episodes 11 through 15 is 7 out of 10.
And mine is 8.5 out of 10.
Wow.
Which is weird. Last episode, my score was lower.
Yep.
Which is strange, but...
Yeah. All right. Are you ready for some lightning round questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to mostly use some of the same questions we asked last time, because I feel like it's still pertinent. So, favorite character or new character in these episodes?
I don't know if I have a favorite new character. But I don't know. I feel like it's a cop-out answer, but like in these episodes specifically, like Zuko is just such an interesting character. Zuko and Iroh. So I would pick them kind of in tandem.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I like the Blue Spirit as a character even before you find out that it's Zuko. Mm-hmm. I think that is just really fun to watch. But I also think a new character that I really like in these episodes is June, the bounty hunter.
Oh.
I like her as a character. I think she's really interesting.
She's interesting.
I like that she kind of holds her own against Iroh and Zuko. She's not intimidated by them. She just, kind of holds her own. So, least favorite character in these episodes?
Aunt Wu.
Wow, really?
I'm sorry. I don't like her.
Wow.
She has a whole village living their life based on her every whim. Like, she could say anything and they would just do what she says, and it bothers me so much. If not Aunt Wu, then it's the Zhangs and the Ganjins.
Yeah.
Ganjins, or however you say it.
Yeah.
I hate them too.
Yeah. Those would be my least favorite characters, would be the Zhangs and the Ganjins. Mm-hmm. Yeah, whatever they are. I hate them so much. What was your favorite episode in this section?
It's really hard for me to pick between the Storm and the Blue Spirit. I want to say the Storm.
Okay. I think mine's the Blue Spirit.
Yeah, it's very close for me, though.
It's really close for me, too.
So, but I think it's the Storm. And that's mostly just because of the one critique I have of the Blue Spirit, and it's that I wish the episode was longer.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite plot line in these episodes? So maybe it might not be an A plot, but like a B plot in one of these episodes.
I mean, the answer that first came to my head is I just love how the parallel backstories are told in The Storm.
Yeah.
And I know I picked that for my favorite episode, but like I genuinely love just the way that they deliver the two stories, like, and without confusingly going back and forth either. It's like everything's laid out just nicely in parallel.
Yeah.
So that's what I would choose, I guess.
Yeah. I think, I mean, I agree. Another B plot I like, even though I don't like the episode, I like the B plot of the episode with Bato of the Water Tribe, when June is tracking them, and they go to the locations that you've seen in the previous episodes.
That's true.
I like that. They go to the herbalist. They go to Aunt Wu's village. They go,
Then they make it into the Abbey.
Yeah. So I like that they kind of circle through that. And you get to kind of revisit those locations. I think that's just very clever. So I enjoy that aspect. I wouldn't say that's necessarily my favorite, but I do enjoy that B plot, even though I don't particularly like that episode.
That's fair.
Do you have a favorite moment in particular?
I kind of already mentioned it, but it's the part that makes me laugh all the time, and it's the end of the Blue Spirit when them sucking on those frogs. I don't know why. It's so funny, and maybe it's childish of me to think it's so funny, but I just do.
Yeah. I think my favorite episode is at the very end of the Blue Spirit when Zuko gets back on the ship and he says he's going to bed, and Iroh's there playing the Sungi horn, and it's playing the melody that we've heard throughout the entire episode, that those notes on the that we've heard the whole episode. And then he's sitting there with the little statue that he looked at in the pirate ship, and it's just sitting there, the little I don't know if it's like a foo dog or like a monkey kind of looking thing, and it's got the rubies around its neck, and he's sitting there. And I wonder, I don't have an answer to this question, but that moment makes me wonder, like, Iroh knew that Zuko was out all night long. Does he know that Zuko is the Blue Spirit?
You know, I thought about that. I had that same question in my head when I rewatched it, and it's not a question I'd ever asked myself before this rewatch. Iroh is very smart, and I think he plays dumb on a lot of things, but he knows Zuko probably better than any other human being in that entire show. I think he does know that he's the Blue Spirit. I don't know if Zuko knows that Iroh knows, but I think Iroh knows.
I would think so too. That's my headcanon, is I think that Iroh knows, because Iroh knows a lot more than he lets on.
Exactly. And I think he does that on purpose.
Yeah.
So...
All right, favorite location in these episodes. I'm going to give you a list of choices. The Great Divide, the fishing village where Sokka, gets a job and goes fishing, the Fire Nation prison, the Fortune Teller's village, or Bato's hut.
I'm just choosing a location.
Or your favorite, or like where you would want to... Let's say you have to stay the night in one of these places.
Bato's hut, then, for sure.
Wow, lame.
Yeah, there's soup right in the middle. I ain't saying no.
It's stewed sea prunes.
Sorry.
That's disgusting.
They probably good. I don't know.
Aang doesn't eat meat, and even he thought it was disgusting.
I don't know. I like the pelts and stuff. I wouldn't want to stay at the Great Divide or in a prison.
You wouldn't want to stay in the prison? You don't have to be in the prison. You could be like in one of the quarters in the prison.
No, I'll go with the hut. I'm going with the hut.
Wow. I think the Fortune Teller's village looks pretty nice.
Yeah, I guess, but I would still stay a night in the hut. You're trying to change my mind?
No.
You don't like my answer?
Saying, no, I'm just saying it looks pretty nice.
That's and what you would pick?
No, I wouldn't pick the... No, I was thinking out loud. I was going to say the fishing village looks pretty nice, but no, it doesn't. The fishing village does not look nice. Yeah, I would pick the Fortune Teller's village, like Aunt Wu's little village.
Fair. That's fine.
It's really peaceful. They've got like a volcano. So they've probably got some like trade winds or something coming through there. It looks like they've got nice weather.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Why are you looking
Everybody
at me?
They're crazy, but I'm just kidding.
No, but see, that's the thing is I bet you they have such a high like resident satisfaction rate there.
That's true.
So, okay. Which traveling companion would you pick? You have to travel with one of these people. The Canyon Guide, Aunt Wu, or the Blue Spirit?
Blue Spirit.
It's not Zuko, it's the Blue Spirit.
That's fine. Blue Spirit.
He's not going to talk to you.
That's fine.
He's just going to do his little hand
That's
motions.
okay. I'm introverted anyway. Yeah, I'll pick the Blue Spirit. I ain't picking Aunt Wu. No way.
You're not going to pick Aunt Wu?
No.
Why?
Because she's annoying.
She's your favorite character.
Shut up.
I'd pick the Blue Spirit too.
Yeah.
The Canyon Guide seems a little off his rocker. So
yeah. I mean, he's probably second choice, but anyway.
I would want him though if he could earthbend. That would be handy.
That would be helpful.
But with his broken arms, I wouldn't be picking him.
No.
Alrighty. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode. We look forward to having you back next time. Don't forget you can follow us on our social medias. Our Twitter is Lion and Mouse Pod, and our Instagram is Lion and Mouse Podcast. And our website, as always, is lionandmousepodcast.com. You can get links to everything there, read our review pages, brush up on some stuff we've reviewed, If you want to compare our notes with our own notes, you can. We also have a suggestion box, kind of an email submission form where you can tell us what you'd like us to review next. We are always open to your ideas. You can also support us on Patreon if you'd like and receive exclusive gifts and content for that additional support. And if you do support, we just thank you so much. We really appreciate it. If you do or don't like what you heard, just please give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. We love getting feedback from you guys. It helps us out, helps us just make better content for you, because that's, why we do this. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will catch you in the next one.